you mentioned Hightower Drive to any of your LA savvy friends, 10 out of 10 of them are going to mention the Hightower elevator and the Long Goodbye House, which of course we've already seen on this tour. Chances are they don't know most of the stories that come out of this really unique and special drive. But after this tour, you're going to be the savvier one, and you're going to be able to tell them things that they probably didn't know. And just when you think that Hightower Drive has come to an end, oh, it has not. This neighborhood just goes and goes and goes and goes, and really, so should we. I mentioned how great the ivy was on the house behind me when we were on this street earlier, but this house is just, I mean, it's like the Farrah Fawcett of hair, but on a house. It's just beautiful. I have no idea what kind of plant it is or anything. Don't really need to. It's just exquisite. But let's go down to the real beauty. This is why I only come out and film on bright days with blue skies, so that you can see the true natural beauty that some of LA has to offer. Like those trash bins, just stunning. No, I do appreciate how neatly aligned they are though, but come on with this tree, the belle of Yeager Place, or I don't know, maybe it's a guy tree. Aren't trees male and female? Deciduous or something? It's like flamingos. I always think they're female because they're pink and stand on one leg. But the male ones are like, oh, no, I'm a dude. Anyway, I do know that it's called a silk floss tree. And they only bloom every so often. And they're scattered all over town, but not quite like this. Or at least none that I've ever seen. I'm not even going to apologize for how much of this tree that I'm showing. It is just so beautiful. I love it so much. But Yeager Place, it's a very short street, just a few homes on it. And I wanted to point out that anyone living on it lives on the north side of the street. And anyone over on this side, the south side, they're actually homes that are down on Camrose. They're the backs and the garages to these homes, which we have not seen yet, but will a little later on. It's just one of those things that's indicative to the Hollywood Hills lifestyle. There are plenty of homes out here whose garages and back entrances are on completely different streets than I don't know what perhaps their addresses may be. Probably extremely confusing for deliveries. I'm climbing back up on my high horse soapbox about how human behavior just has not changed all that much and how social media has always been around, but in different formats. We've already gone over the hashtaggers and the taggers, but here is another big group. Parents who show off their kids. We all know them. You're probably one of them. It's fine. Little Annie Rutledges. They did it back in 1943 when they were living here at 6877. Informing the world that their daughter was the youngest ballet dancer in all of Hollywood, having already danced in 3 shows. She was 3 years old. Next door, but 15 years later, in 1958, little Patty Trimble's parents, they were just pleased as punch to let us all know that their 8.5-year-old pride and joy got a part in a show being performed at the Wilshire Ebell Theater. It was like child prodigy row here. But the best story from this little street happened in between those years, down at the end here, when 6889 was furnished quite lavishly. It was 1948, and 29-year-old Hollywood hairdresser Lincoln Isted, who paid $30,000 to own this place, was living here with his long, red, flowing locks of hair and 2 women. Kimberly Towers, 25, and Michelle Montaigne, 27. Lincoln rented the house out to the 2 young ladies, and together the 3 of them stuffed and crammed it with very expensive lamps and drapes, rugs, vases, or I guess vases in this case, because some of them were valued in the thousands. In 1948, mind you. There were huge mirrors and ornate door frames. It was all very fancy, and it was all very stolen, because the trio were kleptomaniacs, and Lincoln was the ringleader. Sometimes he even stole gifts for the 2 women, but the grossest part of their little scheme to me was that they also stole at least 9 cats, people's pets. That's gross. That's wrong. You just don't steal people's pets. But they were very, very, very good at what they did, because they accumulated so much stuff and they never got caught. It was actually Lincoln's conscience that got the best of him. Very Edgar Allan Poe, very telltale heart. Maybe the part about stealing people's pets got to him, because in July of 1948, he marched himself into the district attorney's office and he confessed to all of it. He told them what they stole, and that they stole from various homes all around the Hollywood Hills and some stuff from a few stores around LA, but it was mostly residential burglary. Well, authorities, they came here and they saw that everything they stole was in fact here on the property, just like Lincoln said. The trio, they were arrested, and surprisingly, I could not find a single thing about how much time they spent in jail, or whatever became of their charges, or honestly, whatever even happened to them. It's all such a mystery, and there are no photos of Lincoln online. But how about this? After he died in 1997, he donated his personal memorabilia collection to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. It's a huge collection. It's over 9 feet of scrapbooks and autographed headshots signed by so many different stars like Gene Tierney. There's one of Debbie Reynolds. Maybe clients, I don't know. The collection, it's only available to see in person. You have to make an appointment and go down there. And it's such a bummer because I can't take any photos or videos of it. Otherwise, I would show you everything in it. He really seemed to be a huge fan of Marilyn Monroe. He had 2 scrapbooks dedicated to her. And of course, in the collection, there is no mention of his past or his arrests, his klepto days, nothing. I'm sure the Academy doesn't even know about it. Not like they would care. It doesn't really matter. It's just kind of funny. It reminds you that back then, your name could appear in the newspaper and you had to write it out. Most likely, people would just forget. And, even in 1997, when he donated his collection, the internet was so new. He was probably like, no one's ever going to know my past. It's not like it's ever going to come back to haunt me or anything. Oh, Lincoln, your secret is safe with us. Now, we saw the upper part of Broadview Terrace earlier on the tour when we were in Tim Burton's neck of the woods, but it officially begins right here behind the Klepto house. Look how thin it is. Such a Hollywood house. Just nothing of a waste on this house. It's also super tight and pulled back because we're about to walk right past their windows, and it's a little awkward, but we're talking about the house on the left anyway. Specifically 2157, which is the top unit. It's a duplex built in 1923. Each of them have 2 bedrooms. And actually, you know what? Let's get away from their window. I can't say the name Doodles Weaver in front of someone's open kitchen window, and that is exactly who lived here in 1946 when he was settling down with his second of 4 wives, Evelyn. Doodles wasn't a dog. He was a man, a goofy-looking character actor, comedian, musician, and radio personality born in 1911. He even had his own variety show, the Doodles Weaver Show. Ran for 1 season in 1951, and coincidentally, his brother Pat was the president of NBC from 1953 to 1955, and Pat's daughter, Doodles' niece, is none other than Sigourney Weaver. But Doodles and his wife, they only lasted about a year, and each went on to remarry and start families. And sadly, Doodles suffered from mental illness later in life, and he shot himself at the age of 71 in his Burbank home in 1983. Just 4 years after his niece's breakout role in Alien. And I do not know how this next story happened. Also, don't really know where the best place to stand is. I feel like everyone back here can hear me. But anyway, all right, in 1956, right next door in this house, actually, no. I still feel like I'm too close. You can actually see it better from over here anyway. All right, no, hold on. Sorry, let's keep going. Let's just go up here where no one can hear me talk, plus we get a much nicer view. Honestly, all I want is a rooftop with a table and some chairs. I love how people do that in this hood. Wonder if the Klepto trio did. All right, anyway, we're here. And this house, it was also built in 1923, and I just don't see how this happened. But in 1956, Mrs. June Perlman was on vacation, and when her daughter came here to check on her things, she noticed $8,500 worth of fur coat stolen. She also noticed that her mother's 300-pound safe was missing. How on earth did anyone lug a 300-pound safe out of here? Down these steps? Crazy. Someone should actually see where Lincoln and his little band of thieves were that night. No, I'm sure they had nothing to do with it 8 years later, but you never know. Actually, it's funny because the other day, I overheard these 2 guys. One got his bike stolen recently, and his friend said, "Oh man, I'm so sorry. This world is falling apart. What's happening to people?" And I wanted to be like, what are you talking about? Falling apart? People have been stealing from people since, pick any day from any year from any newspaper and you'll see something about theft and burglary. It's been happening for eons. Anyway, do you recognize where we are yet? We've been at this crossroad before, and I told you we'd see it later, and later it is. Those of you paying attention will remember that we've done this walk already, but heading in the opposite direction when we went up to see the Long Goodbye House and Kurt and Courtney's. But we are going back because we have to go finish High Tower Drive. Because like I said, when I was standing right here a few minutes ago, there is a whole other side that we need to explore. Do you remember, or did you ever even see the movie Magnolia? Paul Thomas Anderson? It's one of my favorite top 10 movies. There's this killer voiceover monologue in the beginning talking about all these random coincidental occurrences that are just too wild to believe. And that is how I feel about these next two houses, because it's just too coincidental. Starting here at poor Mr. Raymond's house, Frederick Raymond. He was a sound technician at MGM, and he was living here in this house built in 1924 that we can't see because it sinks down into the hill. It's actually really beautiful too. A really big 4-bedroom, 3,000 square foot house. Frederick was living here in 1936 when he was hit by a car on Hollywood Boulevard near Orange Drive. He landed under the bumper of a trolley car. Luckily, though, he was taken to Cedars Hospital and received a few stitches. He returned to this house here where his wife, an active member of the Hollywood community, helped take care of him. And technically, actually, if you think about it, he was an early pioneer in film sound, the talkies. They had only come around within 10 years of his living here. Now, believe it or not, right next door to Mr. Raymond's, it's a 3-unit apartment complex, bungalows and cottages, really. Super cute and charming. Upstairs at 2050 lived another sound technician. Norval Crutcher was living here in 1951 when he had to testify after getting caught up in the communist scare. That whole thing Hollywood went through in the 50s, which is honestly kind of a boring topic to me. But Norval, he was all wrapped up in it when he tried to, I guess, lead a sound technician's strike. Like I said, that's boring to me too. But the insane coincidence is that a few years later is that he too was hit by a car at Olympic in Fairfax. 2 sound technicians, neighbors, both getting hit by cars. What is it with these pedestrians getting struck by trolleys and big, bulky cars? Could you imagine getting hit by one of those huge old antique 50s cars? How dumb would you feel? They're just so bulky and clunky, and the horn is like meet meet. It's just so clowny. Anyway, there's another wild coincidence. Years later, after he had moved, Norval's wife died in 1967, and upon hearing the news that his wife died, Norval died. He couldn't take the news. He died right there on the spot. How tragic, but also romantic? I don't know. But the couple left behind a son who also followed in the world of film sound. He worked on 3 80s movies we all love, Clue, Witness, and The Karate Kid. I was going to see if we could maybe take a peek, but now it just kind of feels like we're spying, so no. The building directly across the street, which looks especially European today, was built in 1926. Peter Tinturin was living here in 1941, and he graced the neighbors, or who knows, maybe annoyed the neighbors, with his musical talents. He was born back in 1911 in what was then the Russian Empire, now Ukraine. But he moved into 2043 where he entertained and created his music. But it was the building right next door, which appears in our next story. And that is honestly the best story to come out of this street, in my opinion. Certainly the most interesting. If you ever visit the Natural History Museum in New York City, make sure to check out some of the famous jewels. The Star of India and the Midnight Star, to name a few. They're on display now, but that was not the case on October 29th, 1964, when 2 men broke into the museum, stealing them along with a bunch of other jewels, part of the J.P. Morgan jewel collection. making it the biggest jewel heist of the century up until that point. The two men, they were Allan Kuhn and Jack Murphy, also known as Murf the Surf, because he was a surfer, a surfing champion, actually. Both men, they were very good-looking, very charming, and could manipulate the jewels right off of wealthy women. In the early 60s, the young men had their sights on the rich widows and divorcees of Miami Beach. They conned their way through the entire city, stealing all sorts of jewels, but once that was played out, they decided to go bigger. That's when they drove to Manhattan from Miami, pulling off the perfect crime. Till, of course, they got caught. They ended up fleeing back to Miami with the jewels intact, where they were arrested 48 hours later. See, the cops and the FBI, they were already onto them for all of the crimes they had committed in the Miami area. So when they busted down the door of the hotel where the men were staying, police found shards of glass in their shoes. I think they found glass cutting equipment, and they had photos of the museum on them, but no jewels. The boys had buried them in the backyard of an accomplice of theirs. They were still arrested, but released on bail. Now, you'd think that they would lay low, but no. They only upped their game, and I guess needed to continue that rush that, I don't know, jewel thieves must get, and they continued their spree. They were also front page stars now, and one of the people responsible for that was 23-year-old Nora Ephron. Yeah, as in the brilliant writer who gave us When Harry Met Sally, Heartburn, Sleepless in Seattle, You've Got Mail, all those rom-coms. Nora was a young reporter working for the New York Post, and she covered the story and made temporary stars out of Murphy and Kuhn. People even had Save Murf the Surf bumper stickers and buttons. I mean, Murf the Surf, it is a great name. But listen to this, it gets crazier. Actress and sister to Zsa Zsa Gabor, Ava Gabor, she and her husband claim they were pistol whipped and robbed outside of a Miami country club where two men apparently made off with her $25,000 ring. Well, once Kuhn and Murf had their photos in the papers, Ava identified them and said they were the ones who had attacked her. Well, the defense for the men claimed that Ava and her husband were just looking for publicity and trying to ride the wave, and they claim that they never stole from Ava. And when it came time for the hearing, Ava Gabor was a no-show, telling the court that she was simply too busy in LA filming Green Acres. Well, both men served a couple of years at Rikers for the museum incident before walking out of prison as basically folk heroes for pulling off one of the biggest jewel heists of the 20th century. And what do you think they did? They went right back to it. They returned to Miami and continued to steal. But things, however, got a little darker when Murf got involved with another guy, and those two, their heist involved the death of two young women. Allan Kuhn, he wasn't involved with that one. He and his new girlfriend, Susan, they had fled Miami and moved here, right to this house at 2039. And they began a whole new career as jewel thieves out here in Hollywood. It was short-lived, however. Allan and Susan, they were both arrested right here at this house on July 1st, 1968, for the burglary of a home out in the valley. They were both sentenced, a very short sentence, I think under a year, but Murf the Surf, he was sentenced to jail for his crime, and he wouldn't get out until the mid-1980s. The two men, they had their lives and heist immortalized in the form of a 1975 television movie starring Robert Conrad, Don Stroud, and Donna Mills. Murf the Surf, he loved his past. He loved his persona. He found God and began touring prisons all over the world, actually, trying to reform convicts. He also loved telling his stories, and he often made them just as colorful and outlandish as possible. Allan Kuhn, on the other hand, he became a recluse. He stayed married to Susan until she passed away in 2001. They never had any kids, and in 2007, Kuhn, who had once been jailed for possessing a joint in the 60s, became a licensed medical marijuana farmer. He really refused to talk to reporters, and he laid low until Vanity Fair reunited him with his old jewel heist partner in 2014. The two men, they got together, they reminisced, and they talked about their days as glamorous jewel thieves. Allan, he died in 2017 in his late 70s, and Murf the Surf passed away in 2020 at the age of 80. Granville Redmond, he was a double resident of Hollywood Heights, living first in one of the apartments that you would find if you followed the path behind this private storybook-looking entrance. There's a few really charming apartments that, guess what, we can't see. It's honestly the point, though, and I hate it for us, but love it for them. Granville, I don't know whether to refer to him first as a painter or an actor. He painted really beautiful landscapes, often depicting poppies. He was born in 1871 and contracted scarlet fever at the age of 2. It left him completely deaf, but he ended up graduating from the California School for the Deaf in Berkeley, upon which he ended up traveling the world and honing his talents as a painter. He actually found success with his art very early, and by the time he settled here in LA in the early 1900s, he was married with 3 children. I could go on more about his painting career and the success of it and all the awards that he got, but this is the Justin Root Show, so you know that I'm going to focus more on him not just being an actor, but being one of Charlie Chaplin's really good friends. Chaplin was infatuated with Granville's paintings, and he was struck by his ability to really communicate so effortlessly through sign language. So much so that Granville taught Chaplin sign language and helped him develop his skills as an actor, a pantomime. Honestly, only the diehard Charlie Chaplin fans really know how influential Granville Redmond was to all of Chaplin's success. Chaplin knew, he definitely knew, and he even put Granville in his films, starting all the way back in 1918 and ending in 1931 with a role as a sculptor in City Lights. Not only that, but Chaplin, he gave Redmond his own studio on the Chaplin studio lot on La Brea, still there today, where Granville could work and house his paintings. He lived to be 64 years old, dying on May 24th, 1935, just a few years after his role in City Lights. And I'll show you a bit later where he was living with his family at the time of his passing. And in another coincidence, straight out of Magnolia, across the way from jewel thief Allan Kuhn's place, in a house down behind that wooden garage, way before Kuhn moved in, back in 1927, a woman took out an ad in the classifieds to report a lost amethyst brooch. No word, however, on whatever became of her missing jewels. And now that you all are basically, well, you're almost scholars of the Hollywood Heights neighborhood, there is honestly so much left, but by now you all know that just because you see a sign telling you that you've reached the end doesn't mean that you have.